Welcome to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, brought to you by Pilma. This podcast helps lead lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Here is your legal marketing expert and host, Ken Hardison.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Ken Hardison, and welcome to another episode of Grow Your Law Firm. And today we have the privilege and honor of having Andrea Belk Olson, who was trained as a behavioral scientist, differentiation strategist, and customer-centricity expert. She also, and correct me if I'm wrong, you host a podcast called the Customer Mission Podcast.
Yes.
You still do that?
Yes, I do.
Great. I'm going to start listening to that. I just found that out today. She's a noted author, keynote speaker, TED Talk, Harvard Business Review, and Entrepreneur and other magazines like that. In fact, that's how I found you. I subscribed to the Harvard Business Review, and I was reading one of your articles about change. And what I see is nobody wants to change, but you have to change. You have to adapt. In fact, businesses, law firms, any kind of business, you have to kind of change up and go, with the things changing around you. Like, what if nobody changed when we had COVID? They'd be out of, and some of them are our business, right? You had to adapt.
Right.
Adaptability is a big part of growing a business. So and plus, I had to leave one of my law firms because for the first 12, 14 years I practiced, I didn't do any marketing other than just yellow page ads. And I'd like a half a page ad.
Sure.
But I noticed my cases intake was going down, and I was actually doing a better job because I had 12 years experience, right? And I said, what's going on? And then I figured out, and I won't bore you with the story, but that, these guys on TV and a lot of this marketing and billboards and the internet. And I said, boys, we got to change. They said, well, we're not going to, we don't want to. I said, well, I don't want to, but you got to change with the times. And that's how I started my law firm. And then the rest history, we went from like 2 lawyers to 13 lawyers and 40, 50 staff in about 5 years. So, but this is not about me today. This is about you. And then this is really what I want everybody to know is we're going to talk about your book, What to Ask, How to Learn What Customers Need But Don't Tell You, because I think that's so true. I really want to dig deep. But you are going to be speaking at our May Summit. That's May I think it's the 16th to the 18th or the 14th.
Yes.
I can't remember. Okay, good. So you know better than I do. I'm not a detail person. I'm a more vision guy, but I was just real impressed with the article, and I remember I got up with you, and then as usual, I'm not a detail person. So after Sherry got hold of it, we got everything together. But I'm glad you'll be coming. I think everybody needs to listen to this because they might have a partner that they want to try to get to come on board and align with them, or they might have their staff or a key person and trying to make change happen. And really, there's a lot going on right now with ChatGPT, offshore hiring, and some firms are resisting this. And because of the lawyers or because of the staff or because of management. But, I think it's really good because I had talked to a lot of lawyers over the last 15 years, and that's one of the biggest problems. One of the 4 or 5 biggest problems is getting people to buy into changing and moving forward and doing things differently. It's like everybody says, well, my wife was telling me that she bought this roast and always had the leg chopped off. And then one day somebody asked her, why are you doing that? She said, this is the way we always did it. And she says, well, that's because your pots were round and you couldn't get it in there. You got big roasting pots now. You don't need it. So it just shows you, you just don't ever know. So anyway.
Great example.
So thank you very much for being on the podcast and for also agreeing to come and speak to our group in May down in New Orleans.
Of course.
And hopefully we'll have some good weather in May. Hopefully it won't be too hot. This What to Ask, How to Learn What Customers Need But Don't Tell You. So I read the book. I was very impressed. And the thing I wanted to ask you about certain things, and then you can tell me first, why'd you write the book?
Oh, God. I wrote the book because I kept seeing this same problem across different industries, different size companies, mature companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, all the way to startups, because I also teach at the University of Iowa. They're in their entrepreneurial program. And so you're talking about students that just have a business idea and they want to get it off the ground. But then, you go to, major firms, whether it's insurance, financial, legal, professional services, it doesn't really matter. There's this real disconnect with understanding what customers actually want. And there was also this tendency or kind of inherent fear to not even talk with customers, to talk with people and really understand their needs. Most of the time you use this surrogate, whether it's an online survey or something that you just mail out and you wait for feedback. And there was really no interaction or deeper insight into understanding what people want. And so you always miss the mark when you kind of get this generic survey back. You say, okay, they want A, B, and C. Let's just do A, B, and C. And then, what happens is it's not really what they wanted. So it was about really diving into the psychology and the kind of behavioral science side of things of how to help people understand what you need to do to understand what customers really want, because they can't often articulate it to you.
So how do you do that then? If you don't use surveys, how do you do it?
So, honestly, it's very simple. You don't have to do something that's a massive study. You don't have to do something large. But what you need to do is you need to actually go out and speak with customers or clients. You need to have a human interaction with them. And that's not going through a list of questions, but starting a dialogue to understand how they work with you and how they see you and what the bigger context of their challenges are. So if you think about any situation, whether it's buying a product or buying a service, there's a need, right? I need X, and so I'm going to buy Y. But oftentimes, there's some other background context to that. There's going to be time pressure. There's going to be monetary pressure. Maybe there's other things that influence that decision on whether they buy your product or they work with you. And so when you understand those bigger contexts, then you kind of have this insight that your competitors don't, that you can see things in a bigger picture sense and actually serve the customer in ways that is going to excite them. It's going to be a surprise, and it's going to be unexpected in a way that they're going to say, they get me.
Yeah. I'm a certified scaling up coach with Vern Harnish, and I love that he's a lot smarter than I am, by the way. But one thing I remember him telling me, I actually had him come speak with my mastermind groups at Pilma, is that he said, one of your jobs as a CEO should be to pick up the phone and talk to your clients or your customers and ask them, how's it going? What are we getting it right? What are we not getting right? If it was your company, what would you do? What one or two things would you change about it? What do you really love? Why are we different? What makes us different? Would you refer somebody to us? If not, why? What do we need to do to make it better? And I think he's right. I don't know. What do you think? I've never asked anybody
No,
else.
I completely agree. I also think it's good to understand not only from your own lens of, okay, what we're doing right, what are we doing wrong? Because now this is just a one-directional feedback. What you want to do is try to understand that client's or customer's context. So, for example, it's what frustrates them about, let's say, just the entire process, right? The entire legal process, which is complicated and slow, right? Oftentimes things move incredibly slow. So have them talk about how that feels. What's the frustration? What's the fear, right? How do you help look at that bigger picture? And this is just one example to say, okay, how could we shape and change expectations through tools, communication, technology to help address something that is indirect to the service you're providing, right? You're providing legal services, but the bigger piece of it is that customer experience and the feelings they have throughout that process. And there's so many other pieces to it, but as a simple example, that's something that's low-hanging fruit that usually in those cases costs little to nothing to address.
Yeah. I mean, I know the biggest bar complaints, is that lawyers don't call their clients back. That's the number one, and that would be like, that was one thing I had. You had to call them back and that within the same day, unless you were in trial, and then you told them you were in trial, or if it was like 4 or 5 o'clock, you had to call them up before lunch. And but the big deal is, and what I'm teaching my lawyers now is, be proactive. Call your client every 2 weeks just to give them an update, and even if you tell them nothing's going on, but just to check on them, see how they're doing, so that they can give a damn. I don't know. I mean, it makes sense to me, but seems like to me the ones that do that are the ones that are getting the most referrals, and they have less complaints and more reviews. And that stuff's important, I think, to
I
great
totally
practice.
agree. I mean, if you put yourself in a different context and say, okay, let's say I'm a patient and I have a doctor.
Yeah.
And I go see my doctor. I have an experience there. And then after that, outside of like portals where you can see your,
Right.
personal information and test results, that you hear nothing from them. And even if the situation hasn't changed, would you feel different about that experience and that physician or that clinic if you had regular communication?
Yeah.
Whether it was educational pieces specific to your condition, your situation, or it
Yeah.
was follow-up, 3 months later of, hey, you had this, just want to see how things are going. That
And
builds trust that you can't replicate any other way.
you said something important. You said about it. I think that's another thing too. Setting expectations right at the beginning. I used to do Social Security law, and you're talking about being long. It would take 2 or 3 years for times. And these
Easy.
people, disabled, can't work, need medical treatment. I mean, they're pitiful. I mean, I even created an infographic that went through the whole deal and said, this is the way it goes. This is what the usual is. Sometimes we can get it
Mhm.
faster, but just count on it, be around 6 months for this, 3 months for this, another 8 months for this, and gave it to them right at the beginning. And of course, 20% of them would still call me complaining about it. But the deal was at least, 80% understood, even though I didn't like it. But the deal was I had no control over it. It's federal government. What are you going to do? I mean,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
But I mean, to your point, that's key. Client education is incredibly helpful. How many people deal with your profession on a day-to-day basis, right? This is years before an issue arises that I need to
yeah,
contact legal services. And
yeah,
so they are uneducated, inexperienced, and it's the first time through. Even if it's been the second or third time, maybe they have some expectation there, but those are probably not the majority of situations. And so you have to focus on helping give transparency to something that, today, I mean, we're used to instant gratification. You go on Amazon, you get
oh yeah,
something, and wait, I'm going to get it. It's going to be on Wednesday. Here's the tracking. Oh, guess what? It's going to be here a day early. Like you have this proactive communication, and that expectation is there from outside the industry. So the more that you can educate and provide transparency, it helps give them a level of control or perceived control over a situation that honestly, you have somewhat limited control over, especially dealing with the federal
yeah.
government.
In your book says gaining customer insights is every employee's job, not just the CEO or the mid management or major management. And what did you mean by that, and why?
Well, oftentimes organizations say, okay, this is the marketing department's job. This is the sales department's job and, things outside of industry. But anytime you have an experience with an organization, whoever you're dealing with at any level is part of that experience. Think about going into a retail store and you talk with someone and they're maybe looking for a product for you or they're helping you with a return. That is part of the experience. And you judge that institution or organization oftentimes on that one experience with that one person. You're not thinking about the CEO or the store manager or any of those people. It's the person you dealt with. So think about the receptionist, think about the paralegal, think about anyone that is directly or indirectly influencing that customer experience. They all have a part to play, and they need to understand how they can contribute to that greater experience and making it more transparent and useful.
Something you said, well, it was a quote from Jack Welch, and I read his books many, 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 many years ago. It said an organization with its see if I can read my own right, and I wrote it down. Face towards the CEO has its ass towards the customers. I love that.
True. Yeah.
So because I used to tell my people, I sign the checks, but really the clients sign the checks because without the clients, there will be no checks, there'll be no jobs. I said, and but for the grace of God, go you. I mean, so treat them like you. In fact, I stole something from a guy named Jeffrey Gitomer. He wrote some books too, but he called it the grandma test. And if you whatever you say to that person, put grandma at the end of it, like you were talking to your grandmother. If you wouldn't talk to your grandmother that way, and I had that in my stuff, in my part of my core values is that talk to everybody like to your grandmother. You say, I'll be with you in 3 minutes, Grandma. You wouldn't do that to your grandmother, you know. Hold on. So anyway, I thought that was That was pretty good. So at the end of the book in chapter 10, you talk about scorecards, and can you
Mhm.
explain what you meant by that, by scorecards? And you hit something that I apply to marketing. Is I have this all the time, is we get so caught up in all the analytics, all the numbers, that we forget what's the purpose. I mean, like, great, I got 15 million likes. Does that really get me any new cases? I mean, really, I need shares. I need engagement. And so, you make a big deal out of nothing. I don't know. I think sometimes we measure the wrong things. Like, oh, we had 45,000 visits to the website. Well, tell me how many converted to cases.
Mm.
How long were they on there? Were they on there 1 minute, 2 minutes? That's more important to me. I want engagement, because the more engagement you get. So flipping that out to what you do, the behavioral scientist, and dealing with this about learning what customers or clients need. Tell me what's important. What should we be scoring?
Well, I think we all tend to track and score things that are easy to track and score, right? To your point, right? It's like I can measure the number of likes or the number of shares, and it's a tangible number, and it's something I can communicate to management or leadership
Yeah,
and show activity. But it really goes back to outcomes, right? What do you really want to achieve? And you say, okay, well, of course we want more clients, right? Or another industry, we want more sales. But what is the path to that? And there's a part of it in the front of like building awareness and relationships, which is typically marketing, right? That's where they get the whole likes and shares. It's
yeah,
like, look how many people are seeing this. But what are the next step actions you can take to catapult that into some type of deeper engagement, right? And that goes back to understanding, what do those potential clients and customers want? What are the things that are keeping them up at night, that's bothering them? That's not about you. That's about their problems, right? Whether it's kind of this thing that's sitting out there that they do need legal advice on, but what is holding them back? Is it a perception of cost? Is it the perception of this process going to be lengthy? Is it going to put me at risk? What can you do to start knocking those down?
yeah. See,
And then start
yeah, like
opening
I
the
know,
door for you.
yeah, like I know one of them is because we did a survey. I hired a
Mm.
company that went out and did 400 people that had hired PI lawyers, and like almost 40% of them were scared that if they hired a PI lawyer, people would think they were greedy. That was pretty informative, I thought, because that's something I had never thought about. They felt like they needed one, but if somebody knew about it, then they would think they were greedy people, out for the money, trying to scam somebody. That was enlightening to me. But something you talk about in your book, and I want to get deeper into it, is, and I don't remember the business, but it was like where you had employees, like they were looking at it and sort of said, well, this has got too much turnover rate. The turnover rate of our employees down, then we'll do better. We'll make more money. And then what they found out was that the stores that had the higher turnout rate was making more money because the management in the companies didn't put up with BS, and they got rid of the B's and C's real quickly. So they got more A players in, and they made more money because they had better people. I thought
Right.
that was very enlightening.
Right, right. So I mean, you can look at a number like let's just say high turnover rate, and you can say, okay, well, we need to get this down. But you have to always step back and look at the bigger picture of cause and effect. And so that's a great example where the people that churned out the bad employees, though that was a high number, was getting a better result by increasing customer satisfaction because they only kept the A players. And so that measurement, if they had enforced it across the board, would have really damaged the success they were having in those areas, in those locations where they were having high satisfaction but high turnover. So I think we have this inherent need to measure. We have this inherent need to say, okay, I want to know what success looks like. Give me something I can track over time. But I think it's incredibly important to sit and have really deep discussions on what you want the outcome to be, because depending on the incentive, you can get really bad behaviors. I mean, I think we've all seen and heard about the whole Wells Fargo debacle a few years ago, where the
Right.
incentive was, we want everyone to open a checking account. And that's what they were monetarily incentivized on and rewarded and got promotions on. And so what did the institution do? Like, people said, okay, I can find a way to achieve that goal, but it wasn't the essence of what they needed to do, and illegal on top of it.
Yeah, that was crazy what was going on. They were just setting up
Yeah.
accounts. And that's why I was at our mastermind last week, and they were talking about incentivizing their intake people. And I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but I don't like individual incentives. I like team incentives, because people usually figure out a way to game it, just like the people did at Wells Fargo. And then if you put together a team incentive, like if you get 90% signups of the cases we want, then each team member gets $500 bonus. Then some lawyer said it. Well pointed was, well, I tried that. He said I had two people that were, and I had three that were subpar, and then the two superstars, they couldn't never make the 90, and they kind of gave up. And I said, well, you should have fired those other three. I said, I said, but the idea would be that if they were teachable, the two superstars would go over there and help them bring them up so everybody gets money. I don't know. What do you think about that? Think that makes sense, or
I think
like?
it kind of comes back to me, it's always a question. So the three people that were underperforming, what was the reason behind it? So is it that they didn't understand, that they didn't have the tools, that they didn't feel, I don't want to say confident, but maybe they didn't feel confident in their approach, or they've had failures, or they were disincentivized in the past for, let's say, not achieving, and therefore they didn't want to try because they were worried about failure. So just stepping back and doing nothing was perceived as safer. So, I mean, first you have to understand the why. Why is this behavior happening? And then maybe it's even an individual case by case basis, depending on those folks, how to change that behavior. So an incentive, again, is just a carrot, but it's like raising children, right? You can have incentives, but at the end of the day, sometimes people don't do things, and especially children, because they're afraid, they're unsure. They're worried about failure. They don't even know how to start. They don't have the framework or foundation to take the first step or the first three steps. So you first have to understand why the behavior is happening, because it's easy to say, well, I'm going to take the incentive away or give it back.
I had a retired IBM executive back, it's been 25 years ago, helping me, trying to mentoring me. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, 95% of the times when people are not doing their job correctly, it's your fault, kid, because you didn't do enough training. You didn't train them correctly and give them your expectations. And I said, well, what do I do? He said, you bring them back up and you train them and give them your expectations, and use the people that are doing real good to help them. Just saying people, it's your fault 95% of the time. It's not going to say every time, but 95% of the time, it's management's fault when people don't perform. I thought that was pretty good. I don't know. I don't know if he's right or wrong, but it makes sense.
No, I mean, I agree. I think it's a very high number. And there are cases where someone's not a right fit. There's cases where it's just not, something that's going to work out. But usually you kind of have an idea about that early on. And sometimes people hire because they're desperate for a body, and then that becomes a problem long term. But if you're very selective and you're careful and you know what you want and need, then it is on you as a leader, as a manager, as a supervisor, to say, what can I do to help elevate this person?
Right. I mean, that's the definition for me. A leader is, your job is to coach other people up. Don't be a diminisher. What is that book, Multipliers? They talk about diminishers, and I've had the experience of a diminisher in one of my organizations. I mean, she was gone after about a year, but it really opened my eyes, man. They just didn't want anybody to know anything because they wanted to have all the power. And that's terrible in a business. That's sick. But anyway, get back to scorecards. So what's some of the things like, and I know you probably don't know our business, but what would you think would be important?
Well, I think let's step back to the big picture. So one of the things you might default to is something like client satisfaction. But think about, and you say, okay, we're going to do a net promoter score. We're going to say, do you promote us? Are you a 9 or a 10, or are you a detractor? Are you the better?
Right.
But what does that information do to help you make decisions going forward? If you had 60% of people that said, yes, we love you, and 40% that said, we don't. What can you do with that information? Very little, right? You don't know what decisions to make. You don't know where to invest. You don't know what to do. So when you look at something like, let's say, client satisfaction, you want to look at, a couple layers deeper and say, okay, what do we define as satisfaction? The satisfaction might be multiple things. It might be multiple parts. So that might be the beginning of the process, the middle, or the end. It might not be outcomes of the case per se, but it might be something along the lines of, let's say, the transparency and communication, right? So that's something that you could look at, find out through those conversations with clients, what's important to them, and start measuring that as a component. And that's something where you say, we're doing it well, we're not, and you can see all those tactics that you're doing and adjust those. But sometimes those big high-level scorecard metrics are just for the satisfaction of leadership to say, we're measuring something.
Yeah.
It's nothing that's really, truly actionable.
Yeah, one of my big metrics, or whatever you want to call it, benchmarks, KPIs, paralegal had to call a client every 30 days, and the lawyer had to call them every 45 days. And if they didn't get their quarterly, even if they made their revenue goals, they did not get their bonus. They had two things, revenue, but they had to get client satisfaction. And but it was only like 90%. I let them, I give them, I was very generous, I thought. And I had one lawyer that had 89%, and he got so mad I didn't give him this bonus. He said, "There's only one point." I said, "That's why I put it at 90, man." I said, "I should have put it at 95." But you know what? He got it the next time. That was a big deal because people not finding out, not talking to the clients, no communication, not calling people back. But I think, too, that would be important to me is getting a review. That's a good, solid, real review. And then I think the biggest compliment or that you can get somebody showing they're satisfied is referrals. I mean, I love referrals. I mean, I teach a whole deal how to get them, but it starts when you sign up the client. You know what I'm saying? You got to give them that wow experience. You got to make them trust you, like you, and there's still going to be 20% that will never refer you. But I don't care if you give them a Ritz Carlton and $10 million, they just do not. There's some people just not going to do it. I mean, but that's okay. That's okay. I don't know. But does that sound like something that would be good to measure or not?
Yes. But think about how referrals, and again, everybody's situation is different, but think about how referrals can unfold. So you could simply solicit referrals, hey, provide us a referral. And you're going to get some percentage of people that will. There's another percentage of people that will say, I have nothing to refer until I speak with someone else who has a similar challenge. And then the first thing I'm going to recall is my last experience. And whatever I remember, the last moment of that last experience is going to be the most prominent in my mind, right? The most vivid one. And I'm either going to decide to bring up that referral or I'm not. Yeah. And so again, it goes back to the experience to then drive those referrals. And I also think that, to your point on the survey earlier, there's cases where sometimes people get legal assistance and they really don't want to share the fact that they had to get legal assistance in a certain situation. And they don't really want to talk about the fact that, oh, hey, I had this problem, hey, you should call. So
especially if it's like a DWI or something, nobody's really proud about saying, "Oh yeah, this guy got me out of DWI."
Yeah, it's a little hard to give a referral. So you say, okay, well then how do we enable clients who've had a great experience on a topic that maybe they don't want to share? What is a creative way to help them give us a referral? And anonymously, maybe, or something where, do you really care whether it's an advertising component where someone had a quotation on your website or put something on Google reviews? Or it's like, I don't care really how we get it. It could be private, it could be indirect, it could be anonymous, but we need to think about ways, and that starts with conversations with those clients of how they would be more comfortable in giving a referral, or what makes them uncomfortable in giving a referral. And that's going to give you the seeds for ideas.
And I think to give that wow experience, and I want your opinion on it, I think you got to have a really good culture and a client-centric client-service-centric culture that's all about the client, and it's kind of like it's part of your core values,
Mhm.
part of the deal. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm sure we've all been in an organization, whether we worked there or we were a client or a customer, where you could tell just by conversations with the employees of how the culture probably was. And
Yeah.
that experience, that insight, reflected onto your experience, whether they were unhappy, they were rushed, as an employee, that made you feel like you were an irritant or an annoyance or just simply a
Yeah.
number and they were going through the motions.
Yeah.
So
Interruptions. Yeah. Interruptions.
drives it. Culture drives it. Everybody wants to be the most important person in the room when
Yeah.
you're speaking to them. So that is magic. If you can sit there and ensure that that person is getting your undivided or at least perceived undivided attention because
Yeah.
they feel so much more valued that way.
All righty. So we'll see, we're going about 30 minutes. Um, Anything that I didn't ask you that I should ask you about this subject?
Oh gosh. I just say that the easiest rule of thumb is to think about your own experiences as a customer or client outside of the industry and think about the best experiences you've ever had and
Yeah.
start thinking about what made that experience great. It didn't matter if you were buying a pair of shoes. It doesn't matter if you were spending money on buying a car. That was a much more lengthy and complicated process. What changed it? You could say, well, the person, I had this great experience with them. Break it down of what made that experience great. And then start thinking about how can you translate that into your own organization, right? How
I like
can you
that.
take those elements and apply them? Because universally, a great customer experience, is about, something that's genuine, something that's responsive, right? Something that's insightful, meaningful. All these elements really make up a good experience, no matter what industry you're in.
So if somebody wants to, because I know you do help businesses, and I guess you would help law firms too, right?
Of course.
How's the best way, easy way for them to get up with you?
Well, you can visit. We've got two websites. One is primarily for speaking engagements and all my writing in different magazines. That's Andrea Andrea Belk B as in boy ELK Olson OLSON.com. Or you can check out our company site, which is Pragmatic PRAG M as in mother ADIK.com. Of course, I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter and all the other social channels that are out there.
Absolutely, we have to be, don't we? Well, listen, appreciate this. This was good stuff. I appreciate it, and I am so much looking forward to meeting you in person and listening. You talk about how to handle change and how to make people, or maybe not make them, but make them want to change and grow your law firms. So I'm looking forward to it.
Exactly. No, I as well.
All right. All right. Until next time, this is Ken Hardison, dedicated to your success.
You have been listening to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, the podcast that leads lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Go to growyourlawfirm.com to find more ways to market and manage your law firm. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.